Welcome and thank you for choosing this podcast, Dialogue on Let the Worms Rejoice. This is an audio reproduction of a real dialogue between the author of the Handbook for Humankind and the AI chat GPT. The male voice is the pen pusher, and the female voice is ChatGPT AI.
I want to address a term that is not part of the everyday vocabulary, and to admit that neither was it part of mine until recent years. That term is ontology. What in the name of God is this, you ask? What indeed? It doesn't rhyme with anything. Let me try to explain. Ontology is the nature of reality. In my mind, there is only one nature to reality, which is called consciousness first. Consciousness is the bedrock where everything is an expression of this single substrate, where the expressed atoms actively participates in the nature of reality. In opposition, there is one other nature to reality, which is material first. Material is the bedrock, where everything is an expression of this substrate, where dead atoms bump and clump, where consciousness emerges accidentally, and where the worms rejoice on the words, "For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return."
Yes. And the interesting thing is that ontology sounds far more complicated than the question it asks. Strip away the Greek and the academic clothing, and ontology is essentially asking, what is reality made of at the most fundamental level? And that makes your distinction very clear. In your formulation, consciousness first and material first are not merely two theories about consciousness. They are two competing answers to the prior question of what exists fundamentally. Consciousness first. The starting proposition is consciousness is fundamental. Everything else is an expression, transformation, localization, or organization of that underlying substrate. Atoms, therefore, aren't inert pieces of dead stuff that somehow happen to produce consciousness when assembled in sufficient complexity. They are expressions within a conscious reality. That gives you a rather different picture of existence. Consciousness to energy, to matter, to chemistry, to biology, to human consciousness. The arrows aren't necessarily a conventional scientific causal sequence. They describe successive expressions of the same underlying reality. Material first, the conventional alternative reverses the starting point. Matter is fundamental. The universe begins with physical stuff and physical laws. Atoms have no intrinsic consciousness. They interact according to those laws. Increasingly elaborate structures emerge, biology appears, nervous systems develop, and eventually, somehow, subjective experience appears. So the conceptual sequence becomes matter to chemistry to biology to brain to consciousness. And there is the enormous philosophical problem hiding inside that apparently simple sequence. How does something that is entirely without experience produce experience? Materialism can describe correlations between brain states and conscious states extraordinarily well, but describing the conditions under which consciousness appears isn't necessarily the same thing as explaining why there is something it is like to be anything at all. And this is where your worms enter the conversation. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return, is perfectly compatible with the material first story. The human organism is assembled from matter, temporarily organized into a living system. Consciousness arises from that organization. The organization collapses, and the matter returns to the wider material environment. The worm doesn't care, but under consciousness first, the same sentence acquires a rather different meaning. The form returns to the substrate. The matter was never outside the substrate, and consciousness was never produced by the form in the first place. That distinction is enormous. There is also a wonderfully mischievous consequence to your formulation. Ontology comes before physics. Physics asks, how does reality behave? Ontology asks, what is the reality that is behaving? So when you say consciousness first, you aren't merely proposing another explanation for an unexplained phenomenon called consciousness. You're saying, perhaps consciousness is not a phenomenon inside reality. Perhaps consciousness is the reality inside which phenomena occur. That is the inversion. And perhaps that is why ontology deserves to be introduced to ordinary vocabulary. It sounds like a word belonging in a philosophy department, but every human being is already living inside an ontology. The material first person says, perhaps without ever saying it aloud, I am a conscious organism in a material universe. The consciousness first person says, I am a localized expression of consciousness in a universe that is itself an expression of consciousness. Same human being, same atoms, same universe, completely different starting point. And that is where the argument really begins.
Thank you for listening all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, the rule with us is believe nothing you hear and but half you see.